So as you heard from the panel, when they talked about secondary education, post-secondary, and business partners coming together, they really don't want you to be engaged in this effort. They want you to be married to this effort. It's a whole different level of commitment, right? And I hope that is clear. I think it was clear to me as I heard from them. It certainly sounds like, from a state perspective, they're married to the effort. So at this time, we have some guests from Harvard University. Bob Swartz, who's Professor of Practice Emeritus from Harvard Graduate School of Education, and Nancy Hoffman, Vice President and Senior Advisor for Jobs of the Future, and they're going to come up and talk to us for the next few minutes. So, Bob, Nancy.
That's not. Yeah, and do I need to worry about that? No. Good. Okay. Well, first, I'm really delighted to be here. If you're wondering kind of why we are parachuted in from 3,000 miles away, it's largely because, as Russ said before, California is part of a now 9-state network that we established about 15 months ago, that largely in response to a report that I and 2 colleagues at Harvard co-authored called Pathways to Prosperity. Essentially what we're trying to do is work with states to do very much what the last terrific leadership panel articulated, which is to really figure out a way to help states build pathways that seamlessly kind of cut across high school and community college, and that cut across the education system and the workforce system to produce a generation of young people with the skills and credentials to be full participants in the economy and in the civic life of California. I should say that both Nancy and I owe a debt, if you will, to the public education system here in California, and it's nice to be able to do make a modest contribution to repay that. Nancy's a graduate of Berkeley, UC Berkeley, both undergraduate straight on through to a doctorate, and I actually began my career in education a half-century ago as a high school English teacher in San Rafael, and at a time when I got just an enormous amount of support as a beginning teacher, was part of a small learning community, and it just had a huge influence on the whole sort of next set of directions and steps in my own career. So it's great to be back here. We're going to split this presentation. I'm going to do the first half, which basically kind of just with a few pieces of data kind of summarizes the argument that we laid out in the Pathways to Prosperity report. Then we'll want to say a few things about the really enormous kind of crisis that we've got around access to employment for young people in the country, and especially here in California, as you'll see. And then Nancy's going to pick up on that and talk a little bit about some of the international perspectives as well as national perspectives that we bring to this work, and then talk more specifically about the work of the network. If Nancy and I, even though she's not on the stage now, if we interrupt one another, contradict one another, just chalk it up to the fact that we've been married for 43 years. So let me jump right into the presentation. This first slide simply gives you a sort of portrait of the education level of the U.S. labor force. As you'll see, if you add together the sort of the bachelor's degree and graduate degree holders, it's about 32%. And by the way, although these numbers focus on the whole adult workforce, if you will, the 25 to 64-year-olds, they also are almost exactly reflective of the 25-year-old population as a whole. So roughly a little bit less than 1 in 3 25-year-olds have a 4-year degree. Another 10% have a 2-year degree, an associate's degree. Roughly another 12% have a post-secondary certificate. That gets you a little bit over 50% of the workforce, the young adult population. The big question that we raised in our report is, what is our strategy as a country, and I would argue in a minute as a state, for actually helping the other half of young people, if you will, get the skills and credentials that they need in order to be full participants in the labor market. Here's, jumped over one. This is that same slide, but essentially focused just on California, and the numbers are roughly comparable, although it says, roughly 39% current percentage of adults with college degrees. If you add another 10 or 12% for certificate holders, again, it gets you right around the 50% mark. I want to now, just a couple of slides to give you a bit of an international perspective on what's been happening to U.S. high school graduation rates, if you look at them in a kind of international context. This is a 4-decade look. In the 1960s, the U.S. Actually led the world in the proportion of young people with a high school diploma. The U.S. is in the far left-hand side of the slide. The 1970s, as you can see, other countries began to kind of catch up. We made just a slight bit of progress. In the 1980s, again, more countries moving up, investing in the importance of getting at least their young population through to a secondary school degree. In the 1990s, again, even more progress, with the U.S. basically kind of standing still. If to pick out a couple of examples here, here's South Korea, 5 decades ago now, in 27th place. Now first among the developed countries in the proportion of its young people with a high school diploma. And here's the U.S. Basically, the point of this slide is not that the U.S. has been sliding backward. I'm someone who resists the notion of the kind of crisis in the U.S. education system. I think there's lots of evidence that suggests that given changing demographics, given the collapse of other institutions, that our education system is kind of more than holding its own. And you'll see in the next slide, I think there's some areas in which we've been making some pretty significant progress. The problem is, in a sense, that the rest of the world has been just very, very aggressive in kind of moving ahead, realizing that the importance of having a well-educated, well-skilled workforce is really critical to their ability to survive and thrive in this global economy. Here, this is, again, the last slide stopped in the 90s. If you ask what's happened in the current decade, the U.S. graduation rates actually have been moving up. And most importantly, as you can see from those bottom two lines, the gap in attainment between white and Asian kids on the one hand and African American and Latino kids on the others has been closing, has been significantly narrowing. And that's something that obviously we should be applauding and supporting. Not fully closed yet, but that's a real indicator of progress. In higher education, actually, in some ways, the change in terms of where the rest of the world has been moving and where the U.S. has been basically stagnant is even more striking. In 1 decade, from 1995 to 2005, the U.S. position, relatively speaking, fell from 2nd in the world to 15th. This is a more current portrait showing that we are now sort of 11th with a sort of 43% degree attainment rate among 25 to 30-year-olds. There actually was just a story I saw this morning, the latest statistics, looking across both 2- and 4-year institutions and looking across part-time and full-time students seeking degrees. 54% of those who began 6 years ago have actually attained either a 2-year or a 4-year degree. And that's basically flat. However, and this picks up on a theme from the prior panel about dual enrollment. 16% of the students in this, among those starting and seeking degrees, actually began doing college-level work when in high school. And 2 out of 3 of those students who began doing college work while in high school actually have attained degrees within 6 years. Contrast that with the 54%. This is good. One more piece of evidence, and we have lots of other evidence about the power of getting young people started on post-secondary while they're still in high school. So to pick up on sort of Lupita's point, I mean, if in fact we can figure out ways to both address the funding issues and address some of the regulatory barriers, this is an important piece of the puzzle that we need to work on. So our report began by focusing on the attainment data. Then we sort of looked through the other end of the telescope and asked, what's really happening on the labor market side? What do we know about the demand for education and skills? Well, actually, one last slide on the college completion. Again, you all know this story. The issue, we're doing very well at convincing young people to go off to higher education. If you survey kids in the last year of high school, 90% say they're going off to college. If you actually do a survey in the October following senior year, 2/3 of young people are in some form of post-secondary education. But because of these huge attrition rates, if you will, by the time age 25 rolls around, again, it's the numbers that we began with. So, and I guess this is a California-specific slide, and this, I don't know whether you can even read this one. By the way, the slides are in your packet so you can have a chance to look at these. This comes from a report that Nancy Shulock, who's a researcher right here in Sacramento, did a few years ago, looking at the challenge for young people in the community college system in making their way through the system ultimately to attain either a certificate or a vocational or related degree. And the numbers are really stunningly low, and this obviously is a huge challenge. There are all kinds of explanations and reasons for it, but if we are going to, in fact, succeed in really moving the needle and using as the measure of success for not only this new $250 million Career Pathways Trust, very exciting development. We don't know of another development quite like this anywhere in the country, but we think, at least I think, that the ultimate measure of success here needs to be significantly increasing the proportion of young people who are able to make it through to a post-secondary credential with real value in the labor market. So looking at the employment projections, again, the other end of the telescope, we've been hearing for the last 20 or 25 years that the middle is hollowing out of our economy, and at the end of the day, we're really only going to have two kinds of jobs: high-skill, high-wage jobs that require at least a 4-year college degree, if not more, and low-wage, low-skill jobs that the rest of us are going to be assigned to that really don't create enough of a path to get young people into the middle class. Well, I think we now have a lot of credible economists. I'm thinking especially of Tony Carnevale at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, a couple of other colleagues at the Urban Institute, Bob Lerman, Harry Holzer, who are making, I think, a pretty powerful argument that in reality, for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a significant number of jobs, these so-called middle-skill jobs, roughly some people are estimating as high as 30% of the jobs that really are in this so-called middle-skill category that are going to require certainly some education beyond high school, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. What are some examples of these so-called middle-skill jobs, these technical jobs, a lot of which will have a strong STEM kind of underpinning to them? Well, in the computer field, as you can see, computer support specialists, the engineering field, electrical technicians, respiratory therapists, environmental science technicians. These are technical level jobs, as you can see, pretty substantial numbers of openings with pretty solid median pay. One of the things, again, the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce has put out a whole series of really compelling reports in this arena. One of the things that I think is an important message here is, while it remains true that the more education you have, at the aggregate level, the more education you have, the better off you're going to be in terms of lifetime earnings, we are now beginning to see significant enough overlaps so that it really basically it doesn't challenge the fundamental premise, but it basically says it really matters more what you know and what the skills are that you come out with. It's not necessarily the numbers of years. So we're now seeing 43% of young workers with licenses and certificates who are earning more than those with an associate's degree. 27% of those young workers are actually earning more than the average BA holder. And most significant, I think, for our purposes, nearly a third of young workers with two-year degrees are out-earning more than the average four-year degree holder. Right around the time that we released our report in early March of 2011, I saw a report coming out of the Florida public higher education system in which the two-year technical degree holders were out-earning in that state, average BA holders, basically coming right out of the box at about $10,000 a year. Now, whether or not those earning differentials will hold up over time is anyone's guess, and obviously earnings is only one measure of the effectiveness or success of an education, and I certainly don't want to fall into the trap of sounding as if that's the only thing we care about is kind of economic return, but obviously it is one important measure. On the middle skills front, I think this is a really important. The Brookings Institution pretty recently released a report on STEM fields and STEM occupations in which they argue that roughly, we tend to think of STEM as, kind of high-end scientists, engineers. Roughly half of the jobs in the STEM field are in this kind of middle skill category, not requiring necessarily a four-year degree, but certainly some solid technical preparation and academic preparation beyond high school. And as you can see, there are significant numbers of jobs, and the percentage of STEM jobs has been rapidly increasing. This is a California-specific slide about the importance of STEM skills, again suggesting that among the kind of so-called STEM jobs, there's 1.4 jobs for every unemployed person in California. Whereas if you take STEM out of the equation, you've got nearly 5 times as many unemployed people looking for work as you have jobs available. We hear a lot about the so-called skills mismatch. It came up in the earlier conversation. And again, the economists kind of debate back and forth about what the sources are. But the reality is we do have the situation in which we have lots and lots of good jobs going begging in healthcare, in IT, in advanced manufacturing, while at the same time we have huge numbers of unemployed. And I realize, obviously regional economies differ. In my hometown paper, this Sunday, lead story in the business section, the great mismatch. Again, saying, while we have thousands of people who can't find full-time jobs, we have a healthcare industry that has thousands of job openings, with some individual hospitals needing hundreds of workers, both with and without college degrees. Booming life sciences sector, hundreds of full-time lab technicians, positions going unfilled, et cetera. Finally, I just want to say a couple of things about the youth unemployment crisis. When actually the invitation for Nancy and me to come be here with you today stemmed from an institute that we ran back at Harvard in October, where we brought teams from the states that we are working with, and Russ and Lupita, Christopher Cabaldon, Susanna Cooper from Senator Steinberg's office were part of the kind of California team that participated. And one of the sort of highlights of that 2.5-day institute was a presentation from an economist named Andy Sum, who runs a center on labor market studies at Northeastern University in Boston. Andy has probably been the researcher who, over the last 20 years or so, has been most focused on the youth unemployment problem. And he gave a really scary presentation, just in terms of how the bottom has fallen out of the youth labor market for young people. I'm just going to get three slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nancy. But these are sort of, employment to population ratios, and as you can see, just between 2000, and 2012, I mean, we've gone from, nearly half of young people in any given month, who've been looking for work, working down to, to barely more than 1 in 4. If you want to know how this plays out at the sort of metropolitan regional level, here's a really scary statistic. So on the left-hand side, the 10 metropolitan areas that have the highest teen employment rates, and then on the right-hand side, the 10 with the lowest. And as you will see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 10 are in California. This tells you, again, it's a national crisis, but in many ways, this crisis is most intense in California. And finally, I think, for me at least, a really, really sobering slide. This slide compares the employment population ratios of 16 and 17-year-olds to those with males, with 68 to 75-year-old males. And as you can see, in 2000, nearly twice as many young people were employed as the 68 to 75-year-old population. Now, I should say I'm contributing to the problem, but I'm choosing to work. A lot of the people in the 68 to 75-year-old population who are working is not out of choice, but because of the impact of the recession on their retirement, pensions, et cetera. But look what's happened. I mean, while the youth population, the youth that's working, has dramatically fallen down to 15%, the older, old adults, senior citizen employment has significantly surpassed teenage employment. You ask yourself, in terms of our kind of values as a society, and just think of how important it is for young people to, as they're entering the point where they're really entering the labor market, where they should be feeling the most sense of optimism, where it's really important to help people get launched on a pathway where they can see themselves with a career, to have this number of people out of work and adding, going back to the very first slide, if you don't have either kind of an academic portfolio that is with degrees and credentials, and you don't have a resume with work experience by your early 20s, you are in very deep trouble in this economy. And let me now ask Nancy to kind of do the second half of the presentation.
I was sort of a little bit like Tim Rainey in the White Sox. I didn't want to be sitting up there in a short skirt. So I'm delighted to be here and totally admiring of the turnaround in California, and after a rough number of years, the fact that you are really taking this opportunity to invest in the future of the younger generation. So we're here to help you get on your way and not to just emphasize the problem. But I want to say that Bob, in a sense, had the unfortunate task of talking about the problem and giving you some data that really puts the challenge out there. I am going to, in some ways, do the more fun part of this, which is take you on a trip across the ocean to look at some systems that really are transitioning young people very, very successfully from school to a mix of school and work into the labor market. Oops, it's just, there we go. So I just want to say, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the Pathways to Prosperity Network and the sort of traction we've gotten over the last year and a half that we've been doing this work. But before I do that, I just want to say a word about why we're looking at European systems. Despite everything that Senator Steinberg said when we had breakfast this morning, I don't think that California will turn into Switzerland or the Netherlands. You do have mountains, but I don't know about the watches and the chocolate. But I do think there are some real questions and ideas that are useful for us to think about when we're really trying to create a vision. And I guess I would say, while I know many of you came here because it's about the money, it's good to have a moment to really pause and think about what's the vision before you start worrying about how you're going to spend the money. So that's, I'm hoping to just stir your thinking a bit. So Bob ended his talk with these dismal youth unemployment numbers. And I want to just start here by taking a look at what the youth unemployment numbers look like across the 32 OECD countries. These are basically the developed countries. So what you see is the US is sort of in the middle there. And on your left are Austria, Netherlands, Japan, Germany, and Switzerland. And I should say this average for the US is pretty dismal because it also includes, if you look to the far right, some countries like Portugal, Greece, and Spain, which have had youth unemployment, more young people unemployed than employed. So what is it that is in common with those countries at the far left? And it is that they have the majority of their young people in a vocational system, really an applied learning system that mixes school and work between the ages of 16 and 19. So just to start here, because I'm anticipating what you're saying to yourself, which is they track 12-year-olds, once you're a plumber, you're never anything else, this is really a sort of way in which the educators have the employers have captured the education system. When you're in an apprenticeship system, you end up in a low-wage job. You know what these myths are. Well, I hope I will convince you, at least by looking at a couple of the highest functioning countries, that this is not the case any longer. And in fact, some of these myths, we might say, are disappearing rapidly in the US as well, although they did apply in some cases to our vocational system. So just to give you a quick taxonomy for what I call high-quality vocational systems. So there are really two kinds. They're dual systems where students are in a mix of work and schooling on a weekly schedule, and usually are about 3 to 4 years for completion. I love this quote, "School is not the center of the world." I wrote this book called Schooling in the Workplace about these good systems, and in poking around on the web one day, I found a group from, I think they were from Moldova, who had gone to Switzerland to take a look at their system, and this was one of the things that impressed them the most. And if any of you are the parents of 14, 15, 16-year-olds, you would know that it probably is true, that they would prefer to have something to do that isn't always inside a school. In the school-based systems, the school is the home base for students, as opposed to a contract with an employer where you show up at work every day. Many of the schools, like some of the best vocational schools in this country, have enterprises in them, and the schools all include substantial work-based learning. The big challenge, as you've heard from the panel and from Bob in this country, is employer engagement, and really helping people here to understand that we don't have, almost everyone goes to college to get a career, but we behave as if there's no connection between the going to college and the getting of the career. And that's not the case in these European systems. There are checks and balances, but there is total collaboration between unions, workforce employers, and schools. Then I think the thing that's really startling when you look at the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Switzerland, some of the other Nordic countries, that this is not a tracking system for a low-wage job. This is the mainstream system, and in fact, it's only the young people with very academic interests who want to be research scientists or want to be lawyers and doctors who go into the university system. So students pick a career, a broad career area, at about age 15, as we do in some of our best academies here. And what we don't have here, they know when they pick a career that they will have a standardized credential that's really recognized across the country and is portable from region to region. So what are the characteristics of these systems? And if you have the old myths about apprenticeship, these are the things that really have changed, and I would say in the last decade and a half. So one of the big issues is that these pathways are permeable. In other words, if you're interested in engineering, you might know that the best way to get started is in the vocational system, and you may have your eye on a PhD, but you do it in increments, and there are steps along the way. The curriculum is very much integrated and applied, and really there's not this taxonomy problem that we have of saying, this is academic here and this is vocational here. You learn the mathematics that goes with your professional interest, many of which in the contemporary world really require the STEM competencies, as well as, I think if we were to talk to employers, the biggest complaint they have, and the thing that many of these systems actually teach because students are in an employment situation and are watching skilled adults handle issues, is this complex problem solving in a messy situation. It's the kind of thing you do at home and at work almost every day, no doubt, but not something that is easy to learn either in theory or in school. Then the other thing that in some ways is most significant for me when you look at these European systems is that they are really much more attuned to the needs of adolescents than what we do today, where we have kids sitting all day in classrooms, moving around in a kind of uniform way. When I say that, what I mean is that youth, particularly teenagers, like risks, they like challenges, they like to be out and about, seeing how the world works, and much better, as in Switzerland, they are in 3 different settings during any single week, a workplace, a sector organization, and a school where they may just be taking a language and some advanced mathematics course. It's a much more adult kind of way to live your life. And if you talk to Swiss parents, they'll tell you, my 15-year-old never got out of bed on time, she didn't do her laundry. And then, miracle of miracles, she started in her apprenticeship, and now she's up at 7 o'clock, she has her suit on, she's out the door. This is the kind of thing that we need to understand that adolescents want and that adults can provide. So these are just a quick picture of some young people at the Center for Young Professionals in Banking, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So this is, and in Switzerland particularly, a lot of the graphics, the advertisement for apprenticeships really are targeted toward 15 and 16-year-olds. So this is a little schema that shows the school, the Center for Young Professionals, and the bank in the foreground, and then just very nicely lays out the multiple pathways. You can see the little person, the little helicopter swinging in the middle there. That's taking you from your vocational school to a PhD. So it's very clear that there are pathways, that you work, you go to school, and that many, many different avenues are open. I want to just say a word, because Tim Rainey and several other people alluded to the fact that sector organizations can be really significant, because we can't be, no teachers can be knocking on the door of all the local employers and saying, can you take my student and provide an internship? Same for community college faculty, and very often we've expected that, it's just impossible. So what we really need are linking organizations called intermediaries. In Switzerland, most of these are supported by an industry sector, sometimes with some government support. And this is just an example of something called the Center for Young Professionals, which is a place where you would love to go if you had a little leisure time. It's a beautiful old factory building, rehabbed with cafes and lots of light and the latest computer equipment. And there you see 16-year-olds. They spend about 30 days a year there learning the basics of banking. But they're taught by people who have come together across the banking sector and have agreed on what the foundations of the banking industry are for young people. So what you have then is an avoidance of what we often call in this country the poaching problem. That is, I don't want to train someone for IT and get them really good because you're going to hire them and then I will lose that investment. When sectors come together, then they know that the training is across the board standardized, and if they get one person and that person leaves, then they get somebody back. And in fact, often the Swiss companies encourage young people to switch from company to company because since they understand young people, they say, you don't want to be thought of as the apprentice at Credit Suisse for the rest of your life, so go off to another bank, and when you're all grown up, come back. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the really high quality standards. And again, these are things that you might want to think about as you do your own planning for your career pathways application. So one thing I said is that qualifications are transferable. So that means looking within your economic sector to see what are the certifications and how many employers will give them some credibility. The second thing, which I think is really important, is that this idea of the student owning his or her own skills and being able to sell them in the marketplace. The British system of vocational education is too much employer-led and too narrow. It only trains for the specific things that employers need. In these strong systems, the tripartite union employer educator system makes it clear that the skills need to be broad enough so that they can be adapted in a specific company, but also transferable. The other thing I should say, that trainers in workplaces need to be trained, and there need to be assessments of student learning which are very skillfully handled and include employers. And finally, I just want to say a word about the way in which these good European systems manage the supply and demand issue around workplace learning, and this will probably look totally amazing to you. This is what's called an apprenticeship barometer. It's issued quarterly. This happens to be in the Netherlands. It has all of the sectors down the vertical side and all of the regions in the Netherlands, which you can see in the far right, across the top. And it simply keeps track of where the openings are and where you need more openings. Then the government or the sector organization can step in to incentivize employers to take some more apprentices in a specific area. It's kind of interesting, as I was looking at this last night, that down toward the bottom, which you really can't see, is the tourism sector. And you can see there are a couple of regions where that's big. It's probably where you've gone for vacation if you've been to the Netherlands, Amsterdam. And then you see some yellow where there are not sufficient supply, and that's probably the more rural regions. So how does this work at the national level? There is a legal framework for vocational education, usually encoded in some form of legislation, and it sets out the responsibilities of each of the partners. The government is the quality control mechanism, and there are intermediary organizations, as I said, which work between the schools and the employers. This may surprise you, but there's a very, very strong sense, and now the European Union is doing this in general, that it is the responsibility of the government not to let young people be outside of school and outside of work. So there is a social compact that says, we promise you training and a job, and you need to show up. And you lose some benefits if you don't. And that seems to be a really strong message if you look at those youth employment numbers. So I'm getting to the end of the tour of Europe here, but you may be asking yourself, how is this paid for? In some countries, apprenticeships and student employment are subsidized by the government. Interestingly, in Switzerland and in Germany, that's not the case, although there is a kind of background, which is that the government provides a lot of the research and training that goes into making a high-quality system. But just to give you a quick look at the way in which apprenticeships actually turn out to benefit the bottom line of companies, I'll just explain this to you in a second. So the first year, this is showing you 3-year and 4-year apprentices. The 4-year ones are engineering, more scientific ones that require more skilled technical training, mathematics, and science. So the first year, the darker blue, those are a cost to the employers, while the shorter apprentices are already beginning, those are euros along the left-hand side, to produce for the company. I should say that apprentices in Switzerland start out at about 800 euros a month, so similar, a little more than $800 a month for their 2 to 3 days of work. So nice if you're 16. And the salaries go up as they stay on. You'll see in year 3, both the 4-year and the 3-year apprentices are beginning to earn money for the company, and then by the final year, to your far right, you'll see that they're really producing a substantial amount, so about 8,000 euros in benefits per year for the company. And then these companies do have lower wages than the minimum wage, which tends to be very high in Switzerland and Germany. But for 3 years of subsidized school work stipend, it's pretty good for a kid, and the unions are perfectly behind it. So that gives you a little look into the ideas, the vision, the economics behind these strong European systems. Now I'm going to just talk for a moment about the work that we're doing for Pathways to Prosperity and bring us a little bit back to the ground in the United States. So Bob mentioned the report, which seemed to have struck a chord across the country as people read it and said, yes, we really need to take a look at this whole issue of the broad range of students who are disengaged and really need to have much more of a sense of where they're headed with school and more applied experience. So this is the very simple framework for the Pathways to Prosperity state network. The states, by the way, are, let's see if I can do them, Massachusetts, Missouri, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, California, New York, Ohio, Illinois. So those are some pretty hefty states, and they've really jumped into this work. I think you'll see from these levers that they don't look very different than what SB 1070 has been supporting and what we anticipate the Career Pathways Trust will support. I think one of the things we haven't talked about is the career counseling piece, and we're going to talk more about that this afternoon. We got a bit into the grade 9 through 14 pathways, and I gather the conversation here in California is moving more toward an integrated system. We know that huge challenges around employer engagement, and from the people you saw here sitting up on the stage, you already have committed state leaders and the beginnings of a very strong policy environment. So I would say you're doing well in the beginnings of this Pathways work. I'm going to just briefly say what are some of the challenges, and we've talked about some of them already. I know California is working on career advising. One of our staff people is in Long Beach today working on some middle school modules that will get young people out of the classroom and into workplaces early on. But across the country, that's a huge challenge and not too early to start. Most of you know that even if you look in your own family, it's very hard to know how many of the jobs that you're in today are going to be there in 15 years. And helping families to understand the labor market is really important, and our kids need to understand it early on. We've talked about the lack of high-demand pathways, and in California, there's a very strong tendency, we know from research, to counsel young people into the transfer programs. And it's not that that's a bad thing, but many of those who might flourish in a career track really don't get that opportunity because their counselors don't know that that's a good option. We've talked about intermediaries, and there are many in the workforce system, but I think Tim pointed out that there may be a disconnect between the regions that are set up politically, that the WIBs serve regional labor markets and sectoral organizations. And Josh Bruno, who is back over there, is going to be doing a session on intermediaries this afternoon. So that's sort of where we are. One of the things that I wanted to just emphasize, though, is the role of regional intermediaries. And Tim mentioned this new buzzword, backbone organization, comes from FSG and collective impact, whatever you call it. There need to be a set of functions between schools, community colleges, and employers that muster the resources in the region. And these characteristics I've taken from the small literature that defines what those roles are. And I think in some ways the brokering and aggregating of work-based learning opportunities are really the fundamentals. If you don't have an organization that can bring employers to the table and help understand where the openings are, where young people can flourish, you're going to have a very hard time getting these career pathways up and running. I should also say my organization, Jobs for the Future, does a lot of work with real-time labor market data, and I'm hoping that you will have access to that. I think some of that is already available through the community college portal, because you will want to know what are the big career areas, and what do the entry-level jobs look like for the young people that you're working with. As we went across the country doing deep looks at probably about 22 regions now, including 3 in California, Sacramento, the Long Beach area, and San Bernardino, we found these 3 areas as the most common for the openings in the job market, their future in terms of middle skills, wages, and it's probably no surprise to you, but you may want to think about this as you're planning your next move, is that you can't do everything and you can't be so fine-grained that you're meeting exact labor market needs. Working in these 3 sectors, particularly IT, since almost all companies are what we would call IT-enabled at this point, seems to make a lot of sense. A quick word about some of the things going on across the Pathways Network. An example of a WIB, a Workforce Investment Board in Western Massachusetts, that has taken a role that many WIBs haven't had across the country. And Josh's organization, the Private Industry Council, which is also a WIB in Boston, has the same sort of breadth. These are organizations that work with employers, but have also worked with a wide range of youth, not just the kids who are at risk, but a wide set of students who would benefit from workplace learning. So in Hampton County, we found that the technical, our vocational schools do have good career programs, and they do very well. Students graduate at high rates. They do well on our state outcomes tests. They go on to post-secondary at high rates. Our comprehensive high schools, for good and bad reasons, really around the focus on math, reading, standardized tests over the last decade, have almost lost all of their career focus. And so in Hampden County, a big comprehensive high school has now started an advanced manufacturing program with the Technical Community College. Not extremely innovative, but it's really changed the mindset of a lot of 9th graders who I just visited there with our governor, and who've been to see these fantastic boutique manufacturers, and now are all excited about what manufacturing looks like, even though their earlier thoughts were factories are big, dark, and dirty. New York State has launched P-Tech schools with an RFP, which I think will have some similarities to what you're going to see here. These are schools that IBM started one school in New York and has done a fabulous job of publicizing the idea and the early results from 2 or 3 years of student data. It's really a form of early college, but with a 5th-year internship and a 6th-year paid apprenticeship, with a promise to the students that if they complete the applied associate's degree, and one's in computer science and the other is in an engineering tech degree, they'll be first in line for jobs at IBM and its partner companies. And that actually, we talked this morning about it. I think the P-Tech mania hasn't gotten to California, which is perfectly fine, but it has gotten to President Obama, who mentioned P-Tech in his State of the Union speech, and again in this new Youth Careers Connect RFA. And so New York is replicating, a number of other places are. And I'd say it's worth keeping your eye on because there is a very strong employer connection, and that's the piece that's been missing. And finally, Illinois has, I think, done the nicest job that we've seen across the country in convening sectors and supporting them in public-private partnerships to create what they're calling learning exchanges, which are really open source websites, which will also have some human beings with them to do technical assistance in 9 sectors, which match roughly those that you would see in a state CTE cluster arrangement. And those are off the ground a bit now. The first one is in IT. There's a healthcare one, an advanced manufacturing one, and there's no reason why you can't turn to the Learning Exchange websites and take a look at how those are developing. So we're almost at the end here, and I hope we'll have time for a couple of questions. The why now? I do think that we've been struggling with this career pathways stuff for many, many years, sometimes with a large crowd, sometimes with a small one. I think the crowd is growing larger, and I think some of the fears about tracking are disappearing, and the question is why? Why is this a good moment? I mentioned P-TECH, which is up there. The economic crisis, I hate to say there was any silver lining in the economic crisis, but I will say that it really opened people's eyes, families, educators, employers, to the issue of being much, much more strategic and deliberate about how education dollars are spent, what the best bets are for young people, and how we support young people in the transition to post-secondary. I should say I have a PhD from Berkeley in Renaissance literature. So I know a lot about Shakespeare, and I am a great defender of liberal arts. Bob and I sometimes, I didn't interrupt you, but sometimes I think he sounds much too instrumental about education and doesn't say that he did say there are many other reasons to go to school other than the money. But we all know that being middle class is much better than being poor in this country. And so when we talk about the economic crisis, it's not to say that we're giving up the liberal arts, because a good career education can be a broad education. But I think that the economic crisis has said at least we should have our eyes open if we decide that what we really want to do is make a living from being a poet, which luckily I didn't do. So another couple of things about why today. The Harvard report and the pathways work that we're doing, along with work coming from OVE, at the U.S. Department of Education. These major states making investments. I think, as Senator Steinberg said, California's is the biggest, but you're also a pretty big state. But there's a movement afoot in this country to think, to rethink what we're doing with a wide range of young people, not just those that are at risk. And finally, I think the U.S. Is beginning to wake up to the fact that we can learn something from countries outside of the U.S. And in fact, it's not just the countries in the OECD, but others as well that are really skipping some of the growing pains that we've been through in this country and moving ahead, particularly in South America, for example, and in India, to very innovative ways to scaling large-term innovations in education. So I am going to stop there and let you consider whether you're an old or a young dog that can do new tricks. And I think do we have time for a couple of questions? Whoever is, I'm looking at Russ. Okay, so I think we can take a few questions. And I know there was a little rumbling about questions for the panel before us, so we could do that as well. Yeah, sir.
I'm deeply concerned about the lack of deep conversation about the revolution in new technology that impacts everything and is not really talked about. And secondly, the aversion to looking at the power, the employment power of the arts as a cross-the-board inclusive skill set. And the whole thing, I think, needs to be built beyond ICT to include the language of digital media arts as a fundamental pillar in all of our thinking across all areas of academics, because that's where youth engagement comes from.
I totally agree. And this morning at breakfast, this being California, I said every movie mogul in this state should be supporting a high school of media arts. So I don't know what to do. I'd be happy to go down there and talk to them if they would listen to me.
They do that, and they do it poorly, because they do it vertically. They're not committed to policy. They're not involved with Darryl and the work that he's doing. There is not that sense of inclusive political policy, largely because the education leadership is soft on actually addressing that issue like a hammer.
Thank you. So that's a great call to action. Other questions, comments, passionate views that you want to? Darryl, yeah.
Nancy, I think it would be very important to just elaborate a little bit more on the notion of permeability, because I think that's such, in the European system, because I think that's such an important point about how kids in that system, even if they're going on the technical pathway, are not being tracked, how you can switch to the university if you choose to do so.
So one neat thing in Switzerland is that suppose you're in the academic track, but you see, oh, I want to be an engineer and I'd be better off in the vocational track. You have to do a year of work before you can switch. And if you're in the vocational track and all of a sudden you think, oh, I want to be a research scientist, you have to do an extra year of academics. The Switzerland and the Netherlands and a number of these other countries have started technical universities, sort of the MIT model for people coming from the vocational system. The Netherlands has an interesting system where when you pick your vocational system, your vocational pathway, you can pick 1, 2, or 3 or 4 years. The fourth 4-year one is the most popular, and it leads to middle-level management along with your content. So it's very interesting. When we were in Switzerland, maybe you were when you were visiting too, the chief consul from Switzerland, who was in LA but who led our trip, started out as an insurance apprentice. The person who led the vocational system for many years, Ursula Reynolds, who's become a very good friend of ours, started out as in cosmetology till she got tired of cutting hair, and has 2 PhDs, one in sociology, one in history. So this is not true in all countries. Germany really struggles with this issue of permeability, but it is true in the Nordic countries, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands. Interestingly, there's sort of an anti-permeability move in Korea, where they really got the U.S. college, 4-year college for all idea. And then what happened is they don't have enough people to really staff the high-tech jobs that are now open in many small businesses. They're fine with their 4-year degree holders in the big international companies, but not in the SMEs, which are the companies that really are the heft for the economy. So do you have something else you want to say? Did I give the right answer? Thank you. Yeah, one more question back there, and then, yeah, right here. Or a comment?
In the international community, can you share a little bit about the role of sports and football and things like that are very different from our culture in America, and how that plays out in those?
Do you know the answer to that?
No.
It's very short. There are none. Basically, you go to school, and if you want to play soccer, you go find your neighborhood soccer team. Yeah. On that note, or do we have one
We'll
more?
take one more.
Okay. You pick, Russ.
Well, I'll take your comment after the question. You have a question?
Yeah, just a real quick question with regards to the VOCAD standards national certification. Given that our system is set up statewide, And, can someone in California then go to Arizona and have the exact validation?
Yeah. We have chaos around certifications in this country. Some places you can take you can braid hair and do cosmetology without a license. Utah just cracked down on a hair braider for not having a certification. You can carry some things across borders, other things you can't. We notice when we look at labor market data that in the Northeast, things like Cisco certifications are not very high value. You look in New Mexico and they are. So I just did a short piece for a book about what's adaptable from these European systems and what isn't. I mean, what's so different. I don't think we're going to end up, at least not in my lifetime, with a national qualification system of the kind that they have in Europe. And I also don't think we're going to end up with tripartite legal responsibility for education and the transition into the workplace. I do think that around employer engagement, early career advising, the use of intermediaries and sector organizations, we can make some headway, and that's where we should really put our attention for now. So with that, thank you all very much. You've been good listeners.